Good evening. Welcome to the February 24th, 2020 meeting of the Grafton Planning Board. Before we begin, I would like to mention that this will be our last meeting with Bill Scanlon present, as I understand it.
Yes.
I'd like to thank Bill for his support during the transition period from the departure of our former planner, Joe Layden, to the whatever, the coming on of our new planner. There's a word I was looking for and I can't find it. Chris McGoldrick. So
Thank you.
now that Chris has been on the job for a couple of weeks, he's completely up to speed, and we're good to go.
Yes.
So thank you, Bill, for all your support.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
The board appreciates what you were able to do for us.
It's great that you could jump into a situation like this, that you have the ability to deal with. You've had a little practice at that sort of thing. But anyway, good to work with you
Thank
again since CMRPC.
And beginning our official agenda, our first agenda item is public input. If there's anybody here who wishes to bring something to the attention of this board that's not already on the agenda for discussion tonight, now would be the appropriate time to step forward and say whatever you feel you need to say. Seeing and hearing none, we will move on to our first action item, which is an approval not required plan at 42 East Street from the Brooks Family Trust. And do we have anybody here to speak to it? If nothing else, we will distribute the copies of the plan for the board's perusal as we discuss it.
Yeah, I had a lot of trouble trying to look at it online. Well, first, for two reasons. First of all, online went offline, and that was a big issue for me.
Yeah. Today, particularly this happened, was not a good time to try to look at anything online.
Yeah, then whatever format this file was in, wherever it came from, was just didn't like my iMac, which, tablet is one thing, the iMac is another. I thought perhaps, and there's some reason to think it was scanned, not a vector PDF,
Anyway, I'm having,
because it was over 6 megabytes.
I'm not going to.
Well,
Now that we're all done rattling our papers, this is. I don't know if you have anything to say by way of introduction, Chris.
No, so this is an NAR plan generating additional lots. You can see it's mainly some land swaps here. So there's the parcel 44A to be sold to Gary Brooks and become an undivided lot with the portion of 44 in the front. So that's the one with the house on it. And then there is the parcel 46R to be sold to George R. Brooks and become an undivided lot on the 46 East Street, which is that corner lot on East Street and Snow Road. And then parcel A is not a buildable lot. And then parcel B is the remaining portion there. It appears that all of the lots here do have the criteria for endorsement. So,
Yes, I found this one a little bit complex to look at because there are so many parcels involved, and in trying to identify what's part of what. I mean, it ends up being 3 house lots, 42, 44, and 46, and a parcel of land combining what's shown on the plan here, Lot 1, Parcel A, and Parcel B. Those are all effectively being held as a single lot. And the 44R and the 46R appear to be getting split off from the original lot, and as you said, combined with the two house lots. I will note, as being really nitpicky, the smaller representation in the upper right-hand corner of the lot boundaries has 2 parts labeled Parcel A. I don't know that that's a fatal defect in the plan, but it is what is shown on the larger part of the plan as Parcel B is shown on the inset as the larger of the two parcel A's.
Yeah,
Yeah, so I do believe that would be an administrative error, but I don't believe it would be a fatal flaw in the plan.
maybe we should accompany whatever goes to the registry with that note. I don't know how one does that, but
I think we could ask for a new Mylar.
Yeah, that's,
Okay.
I was just thinking exactly that, just before I said that
So-
before the board endorses, and typically, we authorize the planner to sign on behalf of the board, but, I would recommend a corrected plan be signed.
Yeah.
But that notational error doesn't really impact, I think, the board's decision.
I agree.
so lot one is a unbuilt but buildable lot, top left,
Yep,
and all the other land is combined or whatever.
I believe the note says that it's under 61A. It's a 61A parcel.
Yeah.
So the remaining land will continue in 61A, according to the note.
Yeah. Yeah. It looks like, well, I can't tell, but I think it only has 70, parcel B, remaining land, has 70 feet of frontage.
It
on
has a little
Snow
bit more
Road.
than that because there is essentially two cutouts of one not owned by the Brooks Family Trust, another is owned by Brooks Family Trust that cuts out of parcel B, and there's this tiny bit of frontage along Snow Road that,
Well, I can't tell whether,
yeah,
The-
so that's
the-
70 feet and then the 80 feet.
I can't
down.
tell whether the 80 feet is on the road.
Yeah, the original, the parcel originally, prior to this, Lot 1, Lot 42, Parcel 44R, Parcel 46R, Parcel A, and Parcel B are all a single parcel on the assessor's map.
And I recall within the past year as well, we did another A&R for the same ownership, which I think is where some of these, one of either parcel, lot 44 or lot 42 initially came from.
When a new A&R is approved, does that do away with the previous A&R, or are both still active and either one?
The latest plan is the one that's in effect,
Latest one that's been
recorded.
registered,
Been recorded,
been recorded.
yes.
Someone has a lot of fun drawing these things. Figuring out where to,
Yes, so this is almost every time we look at an A and R, we have to scratch our heads a little bit to try to figure out what are the old boundaries and what are the new boundaries.
yeah, they're often not well shown.
There's no no generally accepted means of distinguishing the two.
If the board would like, I can try to in the future provide the previous A&R plan
Yeah.
that it's superseding, and that might help for the understanding of those conditions
Yeah.
and how they're changing.
Previous A&R or other, whatever the definition of the lot is.
Yeah, that would certainly help me in general, but I don't know if that's necessarily going to be required in every case because I think the A&Rs need to try to depict that in and of itself rather than relying on previous.
Yeah.
But I don't think you can, I couldn't, certainly online, I certainly couldn't tell from, I
Yeah,
couldn't, couldn't navigate
the
through it.
notation block is kind of what
Yeah, but
gave me that.
but-
But it did take a little while of head scratching to figure it out. Yes.
way over here says lot something or other, and then you go all over the page trying to find lot whatever, and is that what they're talking about, or is that the old?
I
I
understand.
think
In the
it
future,
would
I'll
help
provide
to,
a clarifying.
at least
memo.
if we got a situation that's at all
Yep.
complicated.
One of the items on my list of things to think about as we revise our subdivision rules and regulations is to look at, so happens one portion of that deals with A&Rs. And, it is there where we could conceivably spell out some requirements for how these plans are to be drawn so that we can make the distinction, but
I
I
we
don't
might,
know that we're gonna try to do that, but it's an idea.
I'm not even sure whether we're allowed to do that.
I believe statutorily there's a very limited set of criteria that the board is allowed to
So
operate under, so, but we can look at what we can do.
we may or may not be able to do something about that, but it's worth at least taking a look at it
Yep.
to determine whether there's anything we can do, and if so, what would make sense, if anything.
Understood.
Otherwise, we just have to continue to struggle with
Yes.
trying to
And
understand.
I think you could require certain line weights for different elements of the plan.
that's-
That might,
That's
show it better.
that's sort of the kind of thing I was
Right.
thinking, but again, I would, among other things, and I don't want to divert the discussion too far in that direction off of the topic here, but I would want to consult with people who draw these things for a living to, to get a sense of, whether there's a way that makes sense. That- We'll deal with that question some other night. For now, the question is,
Yeah, there's a
This one.
symbol, by the way, on here, a little sort of Z's across some of the boundaries, and
Yeah.
I suspect that means,
So those are a standard symbol for, those are a standard, symbol for combining a lot, showing that those
I don't know when
lots are
I've seen that
combined.
before on a plan.
I don't know that, I can't say that I've ever noticed that on previous ANRs that we've looked at. It may or may not be there, but it's helpful, if, provided that we know what it means.
Okay, well,
Ready for a motion, Mr. Chair?
I would be happy to entertain a motion, although the way I entertain the motion will not involve song and dance.
All right, so I move that we approve the A and R plan with the discussed correction in the remaining land plan, let's parcel A or parcel B, and approve, and having the planner sign on behalf of the board.
we're gonna find that its approval is not required.
Thank you for the
Yeah.
correction in my
The
wording.
motion is that the board finds that approval is not required and authorizes the planner to sign on behalf of the board and communicate to the applicant that a corrected Mylar with the parcel A designation would be very much appreciated.
Be necessary for signature.
Yeah, let's put, the planner is authorized to sign only a plan that is corrected in that particular.
Second.
Understood.
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion now that we've nailed down the motion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Declare the motion carried unanimously.
you.
We now have we've collected
Appaloosa Drive.
all the
Yes.
copies of the plan together.
Yep.
We have an action item, a draft decision on the modification of the definitive plan approval at 11 Appaloosa Drive, Bull Meadow LLC. And this was for an extension of the endorsement of the definitive plan to a date in November, I think it was the 14th. And there was a draft decision posted. This is one of the simpler forms of decision. I did have one suggestion for an additional finding, and that is a finding that cites the section of the subdivision rules and regulations that allows us to extend for not more than 1 year. I think it's important because of the discussion we had during this at the previous meeting where the applicant expressed some concern about the marketability of this plan, given that it would only extend through November. So I think it's important to document as a finding that we are not allowed to extend it for more than 1 year.
So I included a finding F3 in the draft decision, that during the public hearing, the board noted that annual extensions of the definitive subdivision projects are typical to allow the board updates on the project status and to allow public comment during construction. Chairman Robbins noted that generally the board votes favorably upon extensions requested in a timely manner. We can obviously adjust that wording if the board feels necessary. I did provide this draft decision to the applicant, and they felt that that language was sufficient.
I thought it was okay. I did, either Bill or Chris, did either of you get the email I sent very late after the website came back? Just a nit. In the paragraph at the top of findings, it says, it speaks of a motion made by Mr. Robbins and seconded by me.
Oh.
Now, Mr. Robbins is not gonna be making that motion, and I haven't seconded anything. But more to the point is, a long time ago, we were pushed towards drafting decisions that were neutral, that didn't suggest, that didn't say approved or disapproved. It, there's like approved, disapproved as options, and it doesn't say who or what the vote was. That went back to a threat of a complaint or an appeal based on the staff somehow influencing the board or, representing a decision that had been made someplace other than here now. It's a little bit of a pain, but if you can go back through the drafts, not the final decisions, for the most part, you'll see that as a style. So I think there was also sort of a presumption of how it was going to come out, under decisions. So just,
Yeah, that's,
again, Linda and I made the motions.
yeah, that's more
According to
for,
this.
for future reference in decisions that we, yes, staff will generally draft a decision, not presuming one way or the other about how the board will work, how it will vote, and who will make the votes. Occasionally, through copy and paste, sometimes those things slip through. We do occasionally see draft decisions that call out the votes and identify the people who made the motion. But that's, when that happens, it's generally a cut and paste error. Yeah, just to be careful about it. And a decision like this, it's probably not particularly significant. But as a general practice, it's wise for the draft decision not to presume any action on part of the board.
And I will say as well, for my own sake, as a separate note, I think for this draft, this is just fine, but I've seen drafts that are like 20, 30 pages long that having just, two of these big red draft things that that cover some text, not always the best on that long of a draft. I've always been a fan of like faint but visible watermarks on like the document that say, draft or draft one, whatever. That's just my personal preference.
Most often, I think what Joe and others have done is there's something that lets you put kind of grayed out diagonally across the screen draft.
Yep.
Yeah.
But it's really good to have it marked one way or another.
All right, so any other discussion on the draft decision? Any motions? If there is no other discussion, we're all comfortable with F3 as drafted.
Yep.
Yes, I think I would have been a little bit more explicit in citing the subdivision rules and regs, but if the applicant thinks that's good enough, then I'm not going to quibble.
We used to always break this down 2 or 3 different ways, approve the findings and approve this and that, and then approve the whole thing. But where there doesn't appear to be any issue or any particular item that people might want to vote specifically on, I guess I think I could just make a motion to grant as drafted with the correction, well, with the adjustment of who made motions and whatnot.
Second.
Moved and seconded that this decision be approved as drafted, with the substitution of the names of the people making and seconding the motion.
And I guess it can be just in one place. We have one motion, so
Yeah.
you have one currently you have one mentioned under findings and another one mentioned under conditions.
Yes, to be picky, the draft decision cites 1 vote under findings, 1 vote under decision and conditions, and 1 vote under record of vote.
Yeah, record of vote. Well, my motion would assume that staff gets that sorted out.
Yes. So, yes, I will.
And understood on my end.
Implicit in the motion is that the draft decision will be updated accordingly
Yes.
to reflect the actual vote. Any other discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Declare the motion carried unanimously, therefore not requiring a roll call vote. We now have yet another plan. This is for 20 Milford Road. The decision that we issued not so very long ago required a parking inventory and restriping plan to be submitted that had the parking and inventory and restriping plan that they had submitted as part of the application had a handwritten note regarding the parking requirements. We asked them to resubmit the plan with that note properly printed on the plan. I believe that is the notation that's sort of in the lower right-hand corner of the sign just to the left of the land planning identification. So it's-
Where did you find that?
I'm looking back on the old plan to see.
Yeah, the old plan.
Okay, no,
I see.
that block down there is the same as it was. It's,
Parking table top right.
Well, have you, see, I'm looking for this modified plan that would show me that.
yeah, apparently that's not linked in under the project. It's linked
So,
in from the agenda.
I believe that's under
From the agenda.
Exhibit 2.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so so what's new here is the parking table in red on the sort of, kind of in the, on the screen there, you've got the old plan.
Oh, is it?
And on the old plan, in the upper right-hand corner, there is hand-drawn, hand-sketched and handwritten. The new plan, which is linked under the agenda, but not under the project.
Yeah, it should be linked under the project
Yes,
in particular.
Yeah, so
Right.
yeah.
so there, it's the, right, that's the link to the new, the revised plan.
Yep.
And it's in the upper right-hand corner, what's written there in red is the information that replaces the handwritten information.
Mhm.
And in particular, toward the bottom of that block of red where it says total parking spaces, 10 car storage, 10 production number 1, 5 production number 2, 5 business and 3 office. That is what was handwritten on the old plan. 33 total existing spaces.
Now,
There are a few other handwritten notes on the old plan as well.
do we have a decision draft?
The draft decision is,
Yes, I believe the decision, if I remember the wording correctly when I looked it up the other
included
day,
in the
the
material.
decision asked the planning board to endorse this revised plan.
Right, and that's the matter for the board tonight.
What is? I'm confused.
Yeah, this is specifically condition C4.
Well, where did you find?
The decision is the first item on the project page.
Yes,
Oh.
There's the decision.
Very confusing.
The applicant,
Either the links should be in ascending date or descending date.
Well, I will note, at least from my review of things, decision being the first item on the project page has been a consistency since I've been on the board.
I have,
When it's decided, it's been going to the first spot.
actually, that's not,
So,
Notice, for
conditions-
example, the item that we just finished had the draft decision as
draft
the last
decision.
item.
Draft decision though.
Yeah,
Yeah, sometimes.
And-
So this is the final decision, so condition C4 of the decision,
okay,
regarding.
got it. But still, it ought to be.
yes, it's-
We very rarely have this situation.
yeah, this is a somewhat unusual situation, but yes, the condition C4 says the applicant shall prepare a final site plan with a typed parking calculation table submission and endorsement by the board for recording with the decision. So the, what's before us now is the plan that satisfies that condition, if we agree that it does, which we are to then endorse. And it is to be submitted with the decision. So this is one of those cases where something's coming back to us after the decision for our review and approval. There's probably more than one way to handle that, but in this case here, the condition was that we endorse this plan for recording.
Do we
Correct.
need to do a motion for this?
I think a motion would be in order.
I move that we endorse this plan.
Second.
Moved and seconded that the board endorse the submitted plan. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Declare the motion carried unanimously. Get that one out of the way. Yeah, I remember we said, you know, we read and understand what was handwritten on the plan, but we'd like it to be, you know, properly included on the plan. Because at least in the scan that we have, the handwriting is a bit difficult to read. So we're done with that one. Let me see. It is not quite seven. Well, it's 7:28. It's almost 7:30. Probably not much time to get into either of the
Correspondence.
discussion items. There were no bills to be paid or to be signed.
There were,
Was-
but you weren't here.
Okay.
We
If
got
the
enough-
bills have sufficient signatures, they
Yeah,
don't
they
need to do
do.
that.
They have 4
So
signatures.
bills have been taken care of. We'll come back to staff reports. I'm sure that'll take more than 1 minute. Is there anything in correspondence that we need to pay attention to?
Don't know whether you need to pay attention to it, but the CMRPC has an annual assessment on each community that's calculated based on our share of the population of the region. And the letter tells us what this year's amount is. You can pretty well predict that next year's amount will be 2.5% more when the census comes out. Then the next one the proportions will change, probably.
The important note with that is that their a typical rate of assessment has increased, and so we did see a bit of an increase in the amount that we were assessed this year, and we've factored for that in adjusting the budget. So
You know, it's pretty much a certainty that it'll go up 2.5% each year because that's what it's allowed to. I've been present at many of the places when we decided that each year. So when you're writing next year's budget, you can start from there. I'm not sure when the census will hit, when it'll, but I think it's another year anyway.
Okay.
All right, and now,
My clock reads 7:30, so
Imagine.
it's now the appointed time to begin our public hearings. And the first public hearing on the agenda is a continuation of the request for a special permit at 200 Westboro Road for the extension of an existing cell tower. So I think get everybody lined up for this. And just by way of at least my perception of where we're at with this was we left the previous hearing, which was sometime last year, a couple of months ago, with a little bit of work to do. Mainly the board was interested in the balloon test and the photo simulation results from that. A few other odds and ends. I think we were waiting for the report from our wireless consultant, and which we now have in hand, and the applicant has had a chance to review that. And I suspect in the end, it's sort of, it sounds like it's made the situation perhaps more complicated than it really is.
Which has, his report or his input? Yes.
So we now have a substantial volume of documentation that's been submitted to us. I don't know if you want to sort of review where you're at, where you think we are. If anything, I'm sure the board's going to be interested in reviewing the photo simulation results.
Sure.
And we'll take the discussion from there.
Good evening. First of all, my name is Edward Parry. It's P-A-R-E. I'm an attorney at Brown Rudnick, One Financial Center, Boston, Massachusetts. I'm here representing New Singular Wireless PCS LLC, which we'll refer to as AT&T for sake of convenience and ease. So I know the application was submitted in 2019 or at the end of 2019. Basically, what we're looking to do is extend an existing, I'll call it a unipole because it's a flagpole without a flag on it. So it's a, cylinder where the antennas appear to be camouflaged or inside the pole, when actually there are some concealment fiberglass panels that go over these canisters that are stacked on top of one another. So back in 2002, this board approved a special permit for the wireless installation. It was a 100-foot pole. I think they actually built it at 99 according to our plans. Subsequent in 2012, the U.S. Congress, in its infinite wisdom, enacted the Middle Class Tax Relief and Job Creation Act of 2012, and I'll refer to that as the Spectrum Act, or Section 6409, for ease of getting all of that out. Basically what it says is that modifications to approved wireless facilities are in the public interest, that they want to reduce the cost for the wireless carriers so that they can deploy spectrum wherever they're licensed. So they came up with a test. It's called a substantial change to the tower. We would argue that this is not a substantial change to the tower. I did have the benefit, prior to preparing my letter to the board, of the staff report from Mr. Layden, who I understand has since left the town. And I also had the benefit of David Maxon's report, or Isotrope's report. As you noted in my letter, I think there are two ways to proceed. One, the preferred route, and I think maybe the preferred route for the board would be to find it's not a substantial change to the tower and approve it pursuant to the Spectrum Act that would cap off the one-time height installation or height extension of the pole. In looking through the staff memo and trying to understand where the board's coming from, looking through prior decisions with Verizon attached, and I think Metro PCS attached, the board was used to getting substantial information. So in the alternative, I also applied for the special permit, which, and I went through each of the standards under the bylaw for a special permit. I think we qualify either way. As I said, I think it's probably to everyone's benefit that it be approved pursuant to the Spectrum Act. I think the only hang-up in the staff memo was whether this was one array or two arrays. I did some research. I came up with the only case I could find nationally which dealt with antenna array, defining it. Not conclusive, but it talks about one or more antennas. The Spectrum Act does allow the extension up to 20 feet, so technically we could come in, seek to extend the tower 20 feet and just put one set of antennas. In this instance, AT&T needs all 6. So we think we're within the spirit of the Spectrum Act, and as I said, I think it's to everyone's benefit that it be approved in that fashion. Alternatively, this is also the top preference under the Grafton zoning bylaw to attach to an existing facility. 99 feet doesn't work. We've got to go up higher. We think that it makes a tremendous amount of sense to extend the tower 20 feet, either pursuant to the Spectrum Act or in the alternative, pursuant to the bylaw. I know that we had made a request to waive the balloon test. The board declined to grant that waiver, so we did conduct the balloon test. You should have the results. I know you have the results of the initial balloon test. We were also asked to place some arrows to identify where the balloon was in areas where it was hard to see, which to me ran to our benefit because people were having trouble finding the balloon. And we've provided those also. And I assume all the board members have reviewed those. I'd be happy to run through them if I see them coming up on the screen. So that's kind of where we are. I do have some folks here if we need to go into details or there are specific questions. With that, I will end it
I'll
there and
just-
take questions.
I'll just point out a couple of additional facts about this. One is that the tower has previously been modified twice. It was originally one carrier, the second carrier came on, another carrier came on. They were all able to locate below the top of the tower, but you kind of run out of room. You can't go down any farther and have the radios be as functional as they need to be. Understand that. The original approval also was surrounded by a little bit of controversy because the board initially denied a
They did.
request for a 120-foot tower. It was appealed. The resolution of the appeal resulted in the board approving a tower not to exceed 100 feet. As I said, it's been modified a couple times since then.
Yep.
And, we're now looking at going up another 20 feet, essentially, effectively one additional carrier with the number of antennas required occupies a total of 20 feet.
Correct. So let me go back and say some 17 or 18 years ago, I was the attorney that represented Sprint, and so I generated some of that controversy way back when. So now my hair was probably a lot browner and not as white as it is today, and probably
I
lots
think
more.
it's in light of the fact that it was initially controversial was one
Yep.
reason why we kind of wanted to go to the extra mile and document, particularly looking at the effects of the photo simulation.
Sure. And I think, from a settlement perspective, you always try to meet in the middle ground, and back then, these were a bit more controversial. I will say with the balloon test, I think the visibility is pretty minimal going up the additional 20 feet. I think the board in its infinite wisdom back 17 or 18 years ago, and at least one member was on the board,
Bob
I
was here
remember,
back then.
absolutely.
None of the rest of us were.
It's all my fault.
I think in its infinite wisdom back then, we proposed this unipole idea. It's kind of on the Tufts campus. It's set back significantly from public ways. Frankly, it doesn't look like a tower with a lot of stuff hanging off it. So
Yeah, and I must say, my own observation is that particular tower design is pretty hard to see, which is the idea.
absolutely.
Yeah, at the time, the controversy, though, was over visibility, particularly from the historic Clock Museum direction, which is nearby, and that generated a fair amount of happiness. And we ended up where I don't think it's visible from there, certainly not in the summertime. And I don't think I have never seen it, although I wasn't looking for it specifically when I've been over at the museum. But there was specific sensitivity, and as was noted, the final decision was predicated on a particular height based on that. So that's a factor. I've got various questions. I'm wondering, David, since your report, they've given us this new material. Does that give you anything new to tell us or say to us?
For the record, David Maxon with Isotrope, consultant to the board on this matter. I'm not sure that I have seen the new material.
All right.
But I've
Well, there's
just
a lot
been
of
looking at some of the material that's been scanned through on the video here.
Yeah.
So let me just maybe go back to some basic sort of procedural things. First of all, I raised a bunch of issues that have legal implications and recommended that if the board was concerned about any of those implications, that obviously it can't take my advice because I'm not a lawyer, but that it might want to ask its own counsel. Have any questions been asked of counsel by the board?
I think I supported the idea that we should, but
Okay.
in any
So at
case,
this
we
point,
haven't as far as I-
any interpretations you get from a legal perspective
Yeah.
this evening would come from counsel for the applicant.
Yeah.
And maybe you'll be satisfied by that and don't need to pursue any further. I think it's already been said pretty clearly that in my report and perhaps by others, that what the applicant is proposing to do is exactly what towns ask for, to take an existing structure and add to it, to maintain the concealment. It's a unipole, and they're attempting to honor that. So the question more is, as Mr. Perry was saying, whether you want to take it through the Spectrum Act process of determining that this is an eligible facilities request, which the Spectrum Act says you may not deny and shall approve, although there is some question as to whether you can approve with conditions, or whether there's enough specifics in here that you'd rather do it in the special permit format. And specifically in the special permit format, one of the things I point out is that the way the bylaw is written, individual carriers have been granted special permits for their facilities. And if you simply take the tack that it's an eligible facilities request because the FCC says anybody can attach new personal wireless antennas to their tower, to somebody else's tower that already has permitted personal wireless service antennas, then you have left the special permit process and you'll have a tenant on the tower without a special permit. Only because other tenants on the tower have special permits. And the question there is that the approach you want to take? Or is there an intermediate approach which says, yes, we agree this is an eligible facilities request, therefore we'll grant under an abbreviated review a special permit because it's entitled to it. So a couple of different ways to approach this. Now the things that I raise as being questions of whether it fits the FCC's interpretation of what Congress said was an eligible facilities request have to do with one of the FCC's determinations is that it not defeat the concealment by adding to it. And I raised the question that yes, they're attempting to honor the concealment by maintaining the cover, the unipole character of it. But the other question is, was the concealment also a height issue? You know, that part of making it concealed was to make it no taller than the height that it was granted at the time. And in the special case, because it was something that was a result of a legal a court appeal and a settlement agreement or a consent agreement, and that's all legal stuff that I can't get into other than to say that's what makes the facts of this case different than simply adding antennas to an exposed cell tower, adding the height. Now, specifically the question about antenna arrays, as a radio engineer, I look at that and I say, if one operator has a bunch of antennas and they're arranged in a particular geometric relationship, that's an array. So just in this case, what they have attempted to do is to fit their antennas inside the cover of the pole, and half of the antennas are in the first 10 feet and half of the antennas are in the second 10 feet, but collectively, to me, that's an array. If you think about arrays from math class back in high school, you have an arrangement that it doesn't need to be one-dimensional. It can be multi-dimensional. So I don't know that array aspect of this really has any impact on determination here.
Where did that question actually come in?
I think it was the wording
Yeah.
of the,
Actually, no, it was actually in the staff report. So we got we got a staff report from the planning department, as I mentioned, from Mr. Layden, mostly after all of the initial, we just realized it was online, we looked at it, and so that was the one issue that he raised to the board with respect to whether this satisfies the requirement or the standard of an eligible facilities request. So you raised this issue with the array, so I thought, we need to address it. It's an open issue for the board, from staff, whether it's significant or not, we addressed it. Let me try to address it.
okay, if I can just, I've yielded the floor more than just for a quick response. Thank you. So, going to the interpretation of a substantial change, is, for other than towers in the public rights of way. So we're talking about towers, but just not in the right of way. If it increases the height of the tower by more than 10%, or by more than the height of one additional antenna array with separation from the nearest existing antenna not to exceed 20 feet, which is a really miserably written clause. In fact, I added the phrase "more than" in order to make it read like it meant something. And with the way that's worded, it's with a separation from the nearest existing antenna not to exceed 20 feet. So in fact, you're not center to center, which is the way the industry generally talks about antenna separation. They're talking about actually taking it literally, a 20-foot gap.
Right, 20-foot blank.
And
spot,
then you
on
put
top
your
of it.
antennas up.
The-
So interpreting that, just the way the industry generally looks at this is that you're going center to center.
Do you know the antenna configuration currently? Does everybody have two sets of antennas? Or is this the only case where there's two sets of antennas and in the other ones there's only one?
I don't recall. I think one of them may be two sets, but do you have the?
Yeah, if they have two
Elevation
sets, they're
drawings.
squeezing them all together because each of the, I'm just handing the elevation sheet, which you have in our latest drawings.
Yeah, thanks.
So AT&T is proposing two slots for Verizon, Sprint, and Metro PCS / T-Mobile or below. So they each have, I'm assuming 3 antennas each, but at one rad center is there.
Right. So Metro PCS and T-Mobile merged. So that means T-Mobile has 2 slots.
Well, they don't.
Two 10-foot slots. Yes.
Actually, it's Verizon, Sprint, and Metro
Oh,
PCS /
I'm sorry.
T-Mobile.
T-Mobile wasn't on the tower.
Correct.
Okay, because those aren't labeled there. All right. Thank you.
It doesn't help.
Yeah. So they all have one 10-foot slot.
Correct.
Yes.
Yeah, so my thinking on this, particularly when it comes to some of the potentially thorny legal questions, is if the board is comfortable approving this pretty much as presented, then we really don't need to answer some of the thornier legal questions. If we think generally we're okay with this, the thornier legal questions kind of go away. We don't need them to be answered. And that's sort of, I think that's probably one reason why we haven't already tried to invoke some, potentially costly legal advice, because I'm not sure that it's going to be really, as it turns out, I don't know that it's going to be required. It really hinges on the feelings of this board, whether the board as a whole is reluctant to approve this, then we may have to dive deeper in some of these legal questions.
So I guess just to respect, David, are you finised before I?
Oh, thank you for asking. Let me just quickly scan my,
trying not to
we're
get
stacking
too far off
our comments
track
here.
here.
I did make some observations about other design elements that might be of interest to a board reviewing an application. I mentioned that they talk about a new cable shroud because they would be adding 24 cables external to the tower. Does that materially change the
Are there any shrouds now?
the camouflage? So cables are generally run inside a monopole till it's full. and then they attach them to the outside of the monopole. And then they, sometimes not, but sometimes do offer to put a cover over them to match the color. And now you have a little bump out with a cover with cables underneath it. So that's one. There's some mention I saw of wind banding kits on the shrouds, and I didn't see what those looked like, so I just asked whether that's anything that might affect the original camouflage look of the tower. Is this something new, or is this something that's already there on the other positions, and is it visible? Does it matter? When you extend a tower by this much, you may be in a position of having to add structural reinforcements. And sometimes that's in the form of attachments to the outside, welded to the outside of the tower to stiffen it. And a question of whether there are any structural reinforcements planned that would change the look of the tower. And just a simple question about verifying whether the increased height would or would not trigger any FAA notifications. And I suspect the applicant may have answers to all of those if the board has a question about any of those. Under the bylaw, there's also a generator on the site, and the applicant is proposing a second generator. It's so far from the street and from other properties, I don't imagine that that's an issue, but it's something that the bylaw is expressly concerned about. I mentioned the special permit question, and the applicant has generously provided the information you need for a special permit, but as the Spectrum Act, as interpreted by the FCC, says, if it's an eligible facilities request, there's a whole bunch of information that you're not allowed to review or ask for, but you have it anyway. So that probably does not put you in any jeopardy, but if you're in any concern about that, again, that's something a lawyer could advise you on. So I think that kind of covers the high points of, or the low points of my report, for something that, it seems like a straightforward application. You just have a question about what process you want to use to
Right,
review it.
and that, I keep going around to a few questions that might help, because I want to be sure that we do this in a way that best protects the town and the future and so on. In other words, it's not exactly sure what's right, and if we do the wrong thing, we might open something up in the future that we don't want to, and, get something wrong about it, and it's a unique situation, so that does make it a little more complicated. If we approve this as an eligibility request, then eligibility requests cease to be available beyond this height if they wanted to go still higher. Is that true?
It is. So, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, these eligible facilities requests, you get one shot at the time of approval after the Spectrum Act is passed. So you approve this tower at 100 feet. It was prior to the Spectrum Act. Spectrum Act passed. You can now bring it up to 120, assuming all of the antenna array stuff is squared away.
Yeah, I've
But
wondered about that.
it's a one-time extension.
I've
So-
wondered about that ever since it came out, and I read it because this has been something that
Oh, yeah.
I've been on ever since the beginning. And when I read it, I haven't found where it says that.
Yeah, to that point, I had some spare time a while back. And against my better judgment, I read through some of the FCC commentary and that accompanied these regulations, and that question was raised.
It was.
Is this, does this apply? Do you get that, you're 20 feet every time? And they came down, and it was pretty clear in the, it may not be as clear in the regulations, but it was pretty clear in the commentary, for lack of a better term, I'll call it the equivalent of the legislative history, that it was decided pretty firmly that this is that you get one shot from, as you said, from whatever height was approved prior to the passage of that act, you get one extension under that, and that's it.
Right, so the order that was issued by the FCC contains the legislative history and the comments, and you will see that there are specific definitions about existing, when a tower is existing, when it's properly approved. I wouldn't be here saying, well, we'll have to, wait for court decisions. The FCC order is clear. I don't go into boards and say, well, we can do this 2 or 3 times. It's not additive. It's a one-time extension. I don't want to get too far into the weeds, but if this is approved as an eligible facilities request, that's the end for this tower, unless, in the future, the board decides we want to do something more. But, remember that the Spectrum Act is mandatory, where the special permit process is somewhat discretionary. So someone could come in and say, I'd like to add 5 more feet to the tower someday in the future, and the board says, yep, we're going to run it through our special permit process. They wouldn't be able to run it through the eligible facility request process and standards, but certainly the board could do what it wants. If you approve it, if you approve an amendment to the special permit, then you end up in a potential situation. I'm not saying that it's clear cut, but if you amend the height of the tower to 120 feet and approve that, it may still be eligible for an eligible facilities request.
That's if we amend it, how?
If you amend the special permit, run it through the special permit process. So that's why I think it's preferable, both for us and the board, to consider this an eligible facilities request and extend it by the 20 feet. The other special permits you issued were all before the Spectrum Act, so that was the only vehicle to do the attachments.
So,
Plus, they didn't extend the height of the tower.
They did not extend the height,
No.
so I agree, that's,
but that was, one of my things was, if we do this not by eligible, but by special permit, then does that set a new starting point for future eligibility?
My understanding is it does not, because they talk in FCC 14-153, which I think you're describing in
Yes.
red. They talk specifically about the height of the structure at a particular point in time. And that was when it was built.
And I guess
permitted.
the last things, I want to be as comfortable as I can with a particular question, that this was done under court order by, a negotiated settlement, which is, we don't have a lot of guidance in that, in this question.
well, you actually issued a special permit pursuant to that agreement, so
Right.
it wasn't just the court ordering, because,
Right.
the court doesn't order, they don't order you to settle.
No, we agreed with the court and everybody what to do.
Right.
And it was a compromise, and it was a negotiation.
Yep.
And a compromise. This is what we'll grant, so.
Yeah, I noticed that, David raised in his, memo whether the court order makes a difference. It doesn't, it's the approval. And I'll go a step further. I did find the special permit that was issued subsequent to that court settlement. So it wasn't the court settlement that approved the tower, it was actually the planning board special permit adopting the settlement agreement. So
But it was a negotiated set of provisions which might give a different emphasis to concealment or, altering concealment.
let me, if I could just address the concealment thing, because, it's something that I deal with all the time on these tower modifications. First of all, we honored the concealment, by keeping it, we didn't try to bump it out and make it look like,
Water tower.
that it's, I've seen where, people refer to it as a marshmallow on a stick. We didn't bump it out to try to, squeeze too much equipment in. So I think we honored the concealment. There is one exception to the concealment, and that is when you're dealing with height or some of the other FCC standards. If you read the order, you'll see that it doesn't end there. It talks about concealment, so long as it's not dealing with the height, the expansion, or outside of the number of equipment cabinets, or outside of I call it the compound, but outside of the site. So I don't want to confuse issues, but concealment is to the point of it not violating the height extensions that are permitted under the FCC order. So to me, we clearly comply. The only issue that I had was whether the board sensed that we were adding more than one array, and that was something that the planner pointed out. Otherwise, I think we completely fit within Isotrope's report and the memo that I submitted last
I think
week.
you, part of what you gave us was some citation or some language from ARL, and their,
Yeah.
yeah. Discussion of arrays or whatever.
Oh, no, there was a court case that was decided and it referenced the definition of an antenna array. And that was the only reason I gave it. The court
Yeah.
had referenced it, but it was something completely outside of the legal parameters. I agree.
Yeah.
The FCC has not defined the antenna array. I focused on it because of your planning department staff. We're in complete agreement with David, but again, I didn't know what I was walking into based on your planner's memo.
No, but there was an area in there where it was a document from ARL that was being quoted. When I knew them, they were ARRL. I don't know when that changed. It was after I stopped reading the magazine. American Radio Relay League.
Oh, I see, yes.
That's
They're-
the name I remember.
Yeah, they have a base in Connecticut, I think it is.
Like I said, they were referenced in a court case. That's the only reason I used it.
Interesting for shortwave people.
Yeah.
Okay, well,
So let me talk about the bands a little bit, just some of the things. So we are proposing to put a cable tray. We're not just going to band the cables to the exterior. It'll be painted to match. The cables will run up inside. The cable tray will go up, and as you see on the plans and the elevation there, which is on the screen, you'll see the pole is a little bit narrower down at the base. That will feed into the base, and then will go inside. So the cable tray will run up to the top of that lowest canister of antennas, and then we'll go inside with the cables. So I did ask the balloon test folks, what kind of impact that could have on visibility. It's well below the tree line. So the cable tray itself, unless you're standing next to the tower or nearby, is not going to be visible. I had the same question about these wind bands because I didn't know what they were either. So we talked to the tower owner, Crown. There are actually wind bands on there already. When I looked at the photos of them, basically they're like a nylon band that holds the fiberglass in place. And what they do is they use tape to go over those bands so that they blend in with the same color. So if you're not seeing the bands, they're already on the tower as it is. AT&T will obviously have to do the same. And frankly, it's to keep the fiberglass panels in place because I have experienced situations where they have blown off from time to time. As I said, these antennas are not inside the pole itself. They're inside a canister attached to a pole, but then there are these fiberglass panels. So it's nothing more, it looks like a belt that goes around the base and the belt that goes around the top of each canister. And then they put a tape over it so that it blends in with the color, and they're already on the tower for the 3 locations. I think that addresses. I will say one thing about the generator. I did go back to the Verizon generator. What was not pointed out in the planning department memo was that you asked Verizon not to use diesel fuel at the location. We had proposed a diesel generator. We've had some last minute running around with Crown to comply with that condition that was imposed on Verizon. We have found a location where we could put the propane tank next to Verizon's propane tank, maintain all of the spark separations. So we will provide a revised plan to the planning department. We know it's just an error. I picked it up in the Verizon decision when I saw it, and in an abundance of transparency, I think the board wanted propane. AT&T will put propane. That's the extent of my comments. As I said, I'm happy to answer any questions. I think it's pretty straightforward, and I didn't want to overplay this, but
Yeah.
I understand.
I think what I see, it seems pretty straightforward if we go by the eligibility factor, or we can make it very complicated by engaging the council, and so if the public impact is minimal or negligible, and
Yeah, I'd
the
say,
extension,
to me, it seems like I'd like to take the simplest route we can on this, and it's already become, in some sense, more complicated than maybe it needed to be initially, but, we are where we are, and yeah, if we can move this forward, and whatever we end up deciding is the most straightforward way to go. Mr. Maxon, you had a comment.
I do. It's actually a question, and it gets back to the special permit thing. Are there conditions in the special permits for the other occupants of that tower? And if you do an eligible facilities request approval, is the applicant's facility subject to the conditions of any one of the other three special permits granted for that site? Or should your approval of the eligible facilities request include any conditions that might be relevant and consistent with the other conditions that the other occupants have to
It's a good
satisfy?
question. I think we would need to go review those prior decisions
Right.
and any conditions in those prior decisions to determine whether any of those conditions are conditions that we would feel needed to be applied to this particular approval, whichever way we go, either way we go in this approval, we have the ability to impose conditions, if I understand it correctly.
Do we?
I don't know. It's just the federal law says you may not deny and shall approve.
Yeah, let me give it a shot at keeping this simple. So this is all about the tower approval. So Verizon's approval, doesn't really matter because that wasn't part of the conditions for the tower. I've looked through the Sprint conditions, I participated in those discussions and the eventual settlement. There's nothing in the Sprint decision that troubles us. If we're subject to those conditions, I represented to the board that we're not aware of any violations of any of the conditions of the Sprint approval. As I said, I went further and looked at the Verizon decision, noted that there was a requirement that we use propane and not diesel, so I did incorporate that. I don't know that we're really subject to it, but on the other hand, fair is fair, and we're trying to, be cooperative with the town. So we have no problem with you. I mean, we need to comply with those existing conditions in the Sprint approval, and as I said, the one, caveat, the one thing that you may want to deal with is to require that we use propane. It would be preferable that you require it and not, have an agreement that we'll do it. We'll submit the plan, but if there was going to be a condition, I would make that a condition.
So our decision could, one of our findings or wherever, could include basically what you just said, that you said you're subject to conditions and so on.
Of the tower
Recognize that. And then we wouldn't have to worry about writing new conditions.
Correct.
We'd be in agreement that you were subject to whatever is there. And maybe a condition that would
Correct.
pick
So
up on that.
It sounds like it's less clear if we do it under the Eligible Facilities Act, if that would be the approval. I think going under the site plan approval process, although it seems more complicated, I think that would be more clearly allowing the board to impose to carry those conditions forward. I believe. I also wanted, in addition to, they may be the same as the conditions that were imposed on the previous, but I know that the staff comment memo outlined a number of standard conditions. I'm not sure if you've had a chance to review those, but that's those conditions I would consider the board may want to take a look at as well.
Yeah, I would point out that, we have been going through a special permit hearing process
Right.
on the assumption that we don't need any further information. We would be closing the hearing tonight and working on a draft decision. And since we've already collected all the documentation for a special permit, and since this tower was originally approved by a special permit, it may be that a simple path forward would be to just finish out the special permit process. I think we've I think we pretty much concluded that the eligible facilities request still applies to the height of the tower as it existed prior to the Spectrum Act,
Yes.
so that a special permit would essentially preclude any future eligible facilities request. A future modification to this tower, should another modification be desired someday, would fall under the special permit process.
Now that's,
So, and that's, yeah, that was all I was gonna say.
so then remind me now what exposures going special permit would give us and the town that going eligible facility would not.
So I believe the board has essentially, and maybe Mr. Perry, you can tell me if I'm characterizing this correctly. I think the board has before them, if they go under the Eligible Facilities Act, rather than the special permit, the exposures would be that the conditions may not be as clearly carried forward. That may be more of a
Yeah,
gray area.
I sort of disagree. Respectfully, I just, the conditions of your approval, we have to comply with. So we can't go in and waive a condition that, I think we might be arguing about nothingness here, but there is nothing in the Sprint decision that troubled me. There's nothing in your standard conditions that overly trouble me. I would suggest, we're gonna view this as an eligible facilities request approval, whether you call it a special permit or, the bottom line is if it becomes a problem or it's, they're supposed to be done administratively. But if you want to call that a special permit or a site plan, everybody calls it something different. Our position will be, we qualify as an eligible facility request, we get approved, that's great. If any conditions are troublesome, then we'll deal with the conditions. I don't think there is anything troublesome, I'm not interested in picking a fight whatsoever, but I will, if you approve it as a special permit to extend the tower, you may be approving a new special permit for a 120-foot tower. I don't know the answer to that question. Nobody does. I can tell you now, there is no case law on it. So I've advised other boards, if you want to approve it under both, if that makes you more comfortable, but I would not leave the Spectrum Act out.
My reading of FCC 14-153 is that they were very clear about that because they even gave an illustration that was specifically about when the tower reached its approved height. If it had been approved in 1966 at 90 feet, and if it had been extended by special permit before the Spectrum Act to 100 feet, that's its reference height.
I agree
Any
with that.
special permit granted after the Spectrum Act to increase the height, in the way I read FCC 14-153, is it. Whether it's a special permit or a grand high announcement under federal law or whatever the board wants to call it, you have an established height that is the legal permitted height before the Spectrum Act.
Correct, and if you extend that legally permitted height to 120 or 119, you may face that argument later. I'm not here to make the argument, I'm just telling you, you have a certain amount of risk there.
Yeah.
I would approve it under both.
Well, I'm not sure whether, I'd just like to keep it simple, and I feel a little better about the eligible request, eligible facility request. Just going back to my suggestion that the decision could document the recognitions about the continued applicability of underlying conditions.
Absolutely.
Dave, I just have one comment. Bob asked, is there really a significant difference between an eligible facilities request and a special permit? And I think there is, because a special permit is issued under Chapter 40A, and there is an appeal period once a special permit is filed. So anybody that has standing could appeal the special permit decision. In which case, it would have to be determined whether, they have proper standing to make that appeal or not. So if you go under the other way, the eligible facilities request, there is no appeal process. It's simply issued as, through a building permit process.
And if I could,
Or a finding that we don't substantially change the physical dimensions of the tower. And that's really why I'm here, to say somebody in town should make the determination that we're not physically changing, whether that, some towns do it through building permits, some towns do it through site plan review. But I absolutely agree, our position is there is no appeal period. This is sort of the Spectrum Act requires what it requires, and it requires an approval of this. But I don't have a problem with the existing conditions, nor do I have a problem with the,
It requires an approval, but
Diesel.
it doesn't say what, too much about exactly what can be in, or
I agree.
should be in the approval.
Right, we're
Or what
trying to
the-
figure
As
out
long
what
as,
that approval
as long
is.
as the bottom line of the decision is,
Yeah.
okay,
or what the process is. The FCC is silent on the process.
right.
Right.
Well,
While
I'd-
Mr. Perry has said that it's an administrative decision, and that was the FCC's intent, which it may have been, when you go to practical matters and you have a company coming in asking for a federal approval from a local municipality, you're now wrestling with that as to what is the appropriate process. And this point of due process is an important one. I think that the board's job is to may not deny and shall approve if it is an eligible facilities request, but is that at the expense of all other due process under state law? Again, it's something that your counsel could advise you on better than I.
I'm not too sure how many eligible, how many parties there are who'd be eligible to appeal. What do you call it?
Have standing.
How many? There aren't a whole lot of parties that have standing, I don't think, in this case. So the chances are that's a moot thing. They'll delay it 20 more days. Which I sense
we start
is
to get into
okay.
semantics then, and I don't know if, I understand that there were no members of the public at our original hearing. I don't know if there are any here this evening. That might be a good thing to find out.
Yeah, we haven't,
I guess you should.
yes, I would like to open it up to the public. Is there anything more from anybody on the board before we
I have a
I
question.
hope
So,
vote?
this is definitely a very fascinating, terrific topic at this hour. So that said, is the decision only on adding or approving for the 20 feet? Is that all we are talking about, or is there anything beyond that?
That's what we're trying to figure out. Or
Generator as
the
well.
the way you make the decision.
Right, the modifications being proposed are an additional 20 feet in the tower with a bunch of antennas and the associated equipment, the cabling. There is some equipment on the ground, a couple of equipment cabinets on the ground that go along with it.
A generator.
And a generator,
The generator.
And
backup
propane.
power generator.
Okay.
I kind of think we've beaten this up enough.
What'd she say?
My apologies.
No,
What'd she
that's
say?
All right, I think, we're struggling. It sounds like we are struggling. Well, before I say
Stretch
anything
this
more, I'd
out.
like to ask if there's anybody from the public who would like to speak to this. And we've been going on for quite some time on this. And unless anybody's suggesting that the board does not want to approve this, it seems like we're struggling with what's the best mechanics for completing our approval.
So my only comments here is, to me, it seems like there's more questions potentially legal with the existing facilities act, the eligibility requirement, process versus special permit. That's my understanding, but I don't have a strong preference on that piece, on which way we go. I want to just try to make this as simple as possible in general. But the other, just very different topic to say is that on the balloon test, I did note that where there was the old concern about the view from the clock museum, that this will extend pretty much, this is the old, the existing height is almost exactly at that eye line for the clock museum. So this added is almost all going to be visible. But that said, in every other view of this tower, even when I drove by it initially, I didn't find that to be that much of a distraction, and that's when you're looking for it. So if you're not looking for it, I don't personally see that would be a problem, at least to myself. But since that was a problem before, I just figured I'd call that out.
I know when I went out and around looking for the balloon, one of the first places I went to see if I could see the balloon was by the Clock Museum, and I could not see it.
Well, I think I could move to close the hearing. Do this in pieces.
Second.
Moved and seconded that the hearing be closed. Is there any discussion of the motion?
Do we need the hearing open to get the adjusted plan with the propane?
I think we can cover
It
that.
can be handled as a
that-
condition that they be.
we just-
submitted
Okay,
revised.
just making sure.
We just did something earlier tonight that involved a
Yep.
revised plan being submitted after the hearing, close of the
Okay.
hearing.
Just checking.
Any other discussion on the motion to close the hearing? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Declare the motion carried unanimously.
I would make a motion to draft a decision, as we've discussed, under eligibility request. And we probably should make it, either it needs to withdraw the special permit, or we could make a decision that, you know, it's moot because of what we're doing.
I believe Mr. Perry's suggestion that the board approve
Alright.
of both may be adequate. That way you cover all your bases. You can
Do both?
Hmm?
Do both?
do both, correct. So since the Eligible Facilities Act is mainly administrative, as I'm understanding it, we could draft the decision. The board could do the site plan approval, and then additionally do the eligible facilities. And I think that creates the clearest record.
That's my motion.
Second.
I call a question.
Maybe give me my millisecond.
Moved and seconded that the board direct staff to draft a decision basically approving this as an eligibility request, eligible facilities request, and a special permit. Discussion on the motion. Hearing none, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Declare the motion carried unanimously. With any luck, we'll have a draft decision in a couple of weeks.
We'll be in touch. Thank you very much. Have a good
Thank
evening.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you, everybody, for bearing with us. And
It's nice to see you all.
Hate cell towers.
It's a very fascinating and engrossing topic.
this is a bit of an unusual case. With a lot of potentially complicating factors, but I think the hard part is going to be
All taken care of. No problem. No problem.
working on the decision. So, we have, our next public hearing is a request for a modification of definitive plan for the village at Institute Road. This being a new public hearing, we'll read the legal notice.
Certainly. Just make sure I got the right one, because there's two for the same person. Yep. The Grafton Planning Board will hold a public hearing on Monday, February 24th, 2020, commencing at 7:30 p.m. in Conference Room A at the Grafton Memorial Municipal Center, 30 Providence Road, Grafton, Mass., to consider an application to modify the definitive plan approval requesting a 2-year extension to the decision of the Grafton Planning Board dated January 24th, 2018, for the construction of the definitive subdivision plan, quote, Village at Institute Road, a 46-lot conventional subdivision on property located southerly of Westboro Road and westerly of Institute Road, and shown on Grafton Assessors Map 22, Lot 12. Said property is located in a medium-density residential R20 district. The applicant owner is D&F Alfonso Builders Incorporated. Copies of the plan are available for public inspection at the Planning Department Monday through Friday, 8:30 to 4:30, or on the Town of Grafton website at www.grafton-ma.gov at the Planning Department Development Projects webpage.
Okay, now this one is a simple request for additional time.
Correct.
I note that the request is for a 2-year extension, and we have previously on another project, granted a one-year extension because our subdivision rules and regulations only allow us to grant an extension 1 year at a time.
Okay. I know we were advised by the prior town planner to go for a 2-year extension. Just to go over a little bit of the history of the project, as brief as I can be. This project was approved back in January 24th, 2018, and was delayed due to the applicant coordinating with the construction of the proposed subdivision as well as with the town development. There was a mass development project that's located at the former Grafton State Hospital. So during a study that was done, which we'll go over for the next project, for a mixed use, the applicant and the town agreed that that was a good spot for possible mixed use development and tried to coordinate the permitting, you know, between the two parcels for the subdivision and the abutting parcel D that's labeled in the subdivision, and be able to coordinate the two projects at once. So there was some delay on the applicant owner's part, engineering, getting all the plans together and working things out with the town to get this going. So no work as far as the subdivision has been started at this time. However, I shouldn't say none. A small portion of the project, the sewer pump station and some of the sewer main infrastructure has been constructed to allow for the mass development project that the town is working on, to be able to continue that sewer main up to their parcel and their project. So the sewer pump station that's for the subdivision is also an added benefit for the town. So at this point, nothing's been constructed on the subdivision portion yet, and is pending approval. So it's really, more or less just to ease up the administrative portion of the project. If a 1 year is all we can have at this point in time, a 1 year it is. It's better than not having an extension at all.
Yes, we have historically, as I said, the subdivision rules allow us to grant an extension of up to 1 year, but historically, you know, we have granted extensions year by year for as long as it takes to get the project done. I don't know that we've ever refused to grant an extension. I can't remember one of the time I've been on the board.
We've had interactions over issues that have arisen around a project. That's one of the reasons that we do it this way. It gives people a chance to come in and say, there are these problems with what's being done, and we get to address it progressively as we go through the project.
Understood.
You said you mentioned benefit to the town of the pump station.
Yeah.
Who else besides your property would actually get any benefit from the pump station?
So I don't recall the number of houses off the top of my head, but there are several houses along Westboro Road that have been added in. Sewer services have been left for them to tie into sewer if they so choose.
And that flows to your pump,
Correct.
and then, okay.
And then
Wonder if
anybody.
anybody's here to comment.
Any other comments or questions from the board on this?
What's this project about? I am not sure. I understand.
Institute Road, you want to explain to him, this is a long-term project.
Yeah, this is a,
So- Yeah, so this is a original plan for a 46 lot conventional subdivision. So 46 presumably houses along the property, Institute Road and Westboro Road. Essentially at that intersection, there's a portion of property that exists for those
There's a-
46 lots.
there's the good.
Right. So here.
The access is, there are two
Yes,
accesses.
the subdivision is in there.
Okay.
So the
Two accesses on Institute
Yeah,
Road.
so the road going through there. A little dead in there, a little dead in there.
So the board has granted approval for this, and they're requesting the 1 year or 2 year extension.
Oh, this is an approved project.
This is an approved
Development.
subdivision.
Okay.
Yeah, the definitive plan has been approved and endorsed by the board, and what's at issue here is extending the period of validity of the board's endorsement, to use some perhaps unnecessarily technical language about it. And as I said, the zoning bylaw allows us to do it 1 year at a time.
Okay.
Or not the zoning bylaw, sorry, it's the subdivision rules and regs here.
Yes.
And a topic for consideration as we modify the subdivision rules and regs is whether we should allow these extensions to be done for periods of longer than a year, so that we don't force them to come back every year in cases where clearly a longer period of time is appropriate, so. But that's a topic for another time, going by the rules we have now.
And just to say out loud, that section in our subdivision rules and regs is 3.3.13. And
Yes.
it does say, just for the one quick sentence, the extension shall not exceed 1 year.
Yep.
Nice.
We had to deal with that and the extension we just granted earlier
Exactly.
tonight.
This was a very difficult project because there's a lot of wetlands and a lot of it, and it was state land. Institute Road was not an accepted road. It belonged to the state. And we had to go through a great deal of sorting that out and waiting until that. So they,
Sometime, I may have, with one or both of you gentlemen, I think I described some of the process that we went through with this for the, you know, for those on the board who aren't familiar with what Linda was referring to, when we have some spare time sometime, and I'm not proposing that tonight, we can talk about the interesting history of this.
Interesting, for certain values of interesting.
Yes.
Yeah, but, one of the more difficult, there's a history all the way back to how the land came into, ownership.
Anything else?
It's just, is there any,
Do we have any members of the public who care to comment on this request for an extension of time?
I move we close the public hearing and direct staff to draft a decision.
Second.
Moved and seconded that we close the public hearing, direct staff to draft a decision. Discussion of the motion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? So the motion carried unanimously. We'll, the paperwork for that should be taken care of for the next meeting.
Excellent.
And we now have one more public hearing
Yes.
involving the same property owner and an adjacent parcel of land here.
Correct. And again, I don't think I introduced myself. I apologize.
Yeah. Yeah, let's, we'll read the hearing notice and then proceed.
who's the second?
Prabhu did.
I second.
Pursuant to sections 1.3.3, 1.5.7, and 12 of the Town of Grafton zoning bylaws, the planning board will hold a public hearing on Monday, February 24th, 2020, commencing at 7:30 p.m. in Conference Room A at the Grafton Memorial Municipal Center, 30 Providence Road, to consider a special permit application and site plan approval for a mixed-use development of Fonzo Village, consisting of 5 three-story buildings, 4 townhouses, and associated roadways, parking, and utilities, including 105 housing units and approximately 2,000 square feet of retail space, on property located at 100 Westboro Road, Grafton Assessors Map 12, Lot 22. Said property is located in a village mixed-use transit village, VMU-TV district, and partially within the Water Supply Protection Overlay District. The applicant and owner is DNF Afonso Builders Incorporated. Copies of the application and plan are available for public inspection at the Planning Department Monday through Friday, 8:30 to 4:30, or on the Town of Grafton website at www.grafton-ma.gov at the Planning Department Development Projects webpage.
All right, now let me sort of begin this by noting that this is the very first project the board has ever reviewed under village mixed-use zoning. And the procedures for going through this review are somewhat interesting in the sense that we have a multiplicity of uses. We have, to be exact, 2 mixed-use buildings and 4, if I remember, 4 or 5
3.
we have the three big multifamily buildings and 1 other multifamily. So we have 4 multifamily buildings and 2 mixed-use buildings. Under the zoning bylaw, the zoning bylaw doesn't really lay out sort of an overall review process for a village mixed-use project as a whole. But in this particular case, the 2 mixed-use buildings are as of right with site plan review. The 4 multifamily buildings are by special permit. this project has been applied for as a special permit, but to be really picky, it is only the residential buildings that require special permit approval, site plan approval, because special permit includes site plan. So site plan approval covers the entire project, but two of the buildings are by right and not by special permit. So it's a bit of a, at least on the surface, it's a little bit of an awkward sounding review process, although I think it's, in practice, it will be relatively straightforward as we go through it. It's just a little bit different from what we normally do.
When I looked at this, I immediately started wondering what rules or standards apply for the roadways in particular, and how we look at that. Are they public ways? Are they private ways? Are they driveways? You've got a substantial number of people and a substantial number of vehicles in there, and I'm concerned that to know how we go about reviewing the roadways in particular, or anything else that would normally come under subdivision.
So respectfully, I would suggest under this, as noted by Chairman Robbins, that this would be, the site would be reviewed under the site plan approval, and that does outline criteria that the board would be reviewing under for internal traffic circulation, pedestrian, and
But what rules? I mean, we can look at it and say, I don't think that's good enough. In subdivisions, so many feet, this and that. And I don't know whether it should come under, whether the road should be looked at as they would be in private ways in a condo. There are a variety of possibilities, and I don't know, because we haven't ever done it.
Right. The village mixed-use zoning bylaw has only one place where it describes roadway standards. And in particular, unlike subdivisions, unlike other developments that we've reviewed in the past, the mixed-use zoning bylaw does not require that roadways conform to the roadway criteria, roadway standards as laid out in the subdivision rules. So it's an exception. Arguably, it's something that was overlooked when we drafted the mixed-use zoning bylaw, but it is what it is, and the standards for roadways are less well defined under the village mixed-use zoning bylaw, and we have to.
Trying to find out what we can do there, what to be thinking of as we look at this. I'm not sure. Does the rule about separation between intersections apply on Institute Road? And what is the distance from the next intersection, in either direction for that matter? I see a bunch of headaches, but we have to know we have to somehow close in on what.
I think ultimately we'll have to figure out how best to deal with that, given the fact that the bylaw does not give us sufficient standards.
I'm thinking that we should have as good an idea as we can pretty near the front here, so that we can have those in mind as we discuss plans. Apparently, we're not going to present plans except on paper tonight.
Well, I mean, this is not a subdivision, so I don't think your subdivision regulations would apply, and I don't think these are intended to become public ways,
Well,
so they will remain
I didn't
private.
see anything that said that.
But if there are businesses in there, doesn't that define that they're public ways? I mean, how can you have a
Well, so-
business without having it be a public way?
so they would remain as privately held streets or rights of way, interior drives. So similar to other mixed use projects, it's maintained by the property owner or the management company and not by the town. So
I think the applicant is interested in at least giving us an overview of the project, an introduction to the project. I wanted to sort of set some of the understanding expectations in terms of the review process. The question of roadway standards is it's a fair question to ask.
Agreed.
And our bylaw is not as clear as I would like it to be on that topic. But I'll also note as we start out on this, that the project is also before the Conservation Commission for Wetlands and Stormwater. And one consequence of that is the Conservation Commission's review may ultimately result in some design changes to the project, so that we don't want to get too far, and we've encountered this in a number of projects recently, where we don't want to go too far down the path of planning board review before we know what the project's going to look like to satisfy conservation. Because we don't want to have to be reviewing one design and then reviewing a changed design. So that's kind of going to set the pace of this. Enough said for now. Let's sort of
Thank
talk
you.
about the project itself here.
First off, I don't believe I introduced myself for the last public hearing. Amanda Cavalieri. I'm with Gary and Howland, representing the applicant, DNF Alfonso Builders. And as far as this evening goes, we'll give you a little bit of a background, as the chairman has already provided, a little bit more between the two projects. We have presented in front of Conservation Commission last week as our initial hearing. We got a few administrative review comments back. They allowed us to introduce the project, and we know this is going to be, it's going to be a little bit of a, there's going to be a lot of discussion as far as the project goes, being the first mixed-use project that's going before the boards and the commissions. So we do have some changes to make, minor ones at this point, but they have not done their peer review as of yet. And I believe Graves has not completed their peer review for this portion yet as well. So we're still in the very preliminary phases. As you're aware of this parcel, I do have plans. I don't know if you want to see the site itself.
We have.
Yeah, I can pull them up.
The parcel, it was referred to as Parcel D in the subdivision that was previously approved. This is located at 100 Westboro Road, at the corner and intersection of Westboro Road and Institute Road, which is currently, I guess, hinged on this project as well as far as getting everything lined up. In September of 2018, the Grafton Planning Board endorsed the Village at Institute Road and a 46 lot subdivision, which originally was a 47-acre piece of land that was divided along the zoning line. And it was originally defined, this parcel, as office and light industry, to develop, and their plan, the applicant's plan was to develop about 33 acres with the subdivision. However, during the permitting process, the town of Grafton completed the North Grafton Transit Village Strategic Plan in 2017. And that evaluated the existing land uses, conditions and trends, existing and future infrastructure, and natural constraints in the areas for growth in North Grafton, which included Parcel D. And it was noted that that looked like a good location for a mixed-use type of development because of its good location to the local transit, as well as the need for new infrastructure, which they've already started constructing as far as the sewer force main, sewer pump station, and sewer main. So the applicant was working with the town over the past several years in trying to collaborate and get a good project that was suitable for both town and applicant to construct. In May of last year, 2019, the town approved to rezone this parcel specifically from office, light industrial to village and neighborhood mixed use, transit village neighborhood center. And at the annual town meeting, it was approved as a proposed amendment to the Grafton zoning bylaw, Article 3. So here we are today. The applicant and Gary and Howland and the town have been working with a layout, looking at the new zoning regulations for this type of parcel, and to to be aware of the wetlands that are on the property. We are going through Conservation Commission. There was a previously approved detention pond and sewer force main sewer pump station that were approved as part of the subdivision project, that will also serve, and has been incorporated into the mixed-use project. So there is some overlap between the two projects. The detention pond that is, it's on the southwestern portion of the property. The proposed area, and that's going to be reviewed in the stormwater report by your peer reviewer, that's been enlarged to accommodate both developments. The overall plan is to develop the two mixed-use buildings. It'll be commercial retail on the first floor, and then the second and third floor will be residential. And then the back 3 units will be all residential, and there are 4 townhouses to the northeast side of the property. Access will be off of Westboro Road and Institute Road. And what the applicant is proposing, and we're working closely with Conservation Commission on, is developing a phasing plan to accommodate both stormwater management and constructability requirements for the applicant to be able to build this development. The units will be, let's see, what do we have? We have 23 one-bedroom units, 78 two-bedroom units, about 2,000 square feet of retail space, and 4 two-bedroom unit townhouses. And they'll all be connected by town water and sewer. And the commercial and the retail space has not yet been determined at this point in time. I think that's about where we're at with introduction to the project. I don't know if you have any questions.
Are these rental units or are these for ownership by?
For ownership, and there is a percent, I don't have it in front of me right now, but there is a percent that will be affordable.
I thought I had read 20. That it
Might
couldn't
be
remember.
do I have it up here? Yeah, I wanna say 20.
I think the bylaw requires 20%.
For ownership.
For ownership.
20% is required.
So these will be like condominiums or no? Yeah, like when you say ownership.
So these will be, per floor, so it'll be units per floor. And there'll be 1 bedroom and 2 bedroom.
But
Whether it's a condominium association?
Right, because for maintenance and all, like,
I don't know of at the top of my head. We can find that out for the next, as far as ownership goes.
Yeah, so all of the residential units are being proposed as ownership units rather than rental units?
I believe that's the original intent.
I'm looking in the upper right corner of, I think it's that drawing. It's a whole set of lines talking about parking spaces.
Yep.
And not sure, I have some, 1/150 SF blah, 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 SF 94 spaces. 227 parking spaces required. 4 residential townhouses, 2 spaces each provided within the driveway. 242 parking spaces required. 288 parking spaces provided. I'm not sure I understand
Okay.
all the math there and who's adding up what.
Yep. So we've done the parking based on the requirements out of the zoning bylaws. For a site plan, the studio and 1 bedroom apartment is 1 per unit. So we have 23 units that are 1 bedroom, so they're 23 spaces. We have 2 bedrooms. We have 78 units that are 2 bedroom, and it's 1.75 parking spaces per unit.
1.5, your plan,
1.5?
1.5 per,
it says 1.5 per unit.
Yes,
your plan
1.5 per unit. So we have 117 spaces.
Right, you said 1.75, that's
Oh,
right.
I'm sorry. Yes, so
Drawing it says
1.5.
1.5.
1.5. So that's 117 spaces. So when you go through adding all the spaces up that are required based on the 1 bedroom and 2 bedroom, the 2,000 square feet of office/retail, and the total that is required is 227. And then there's the residential units with the townhouses that are on the northeast side of the property. And when you add them all up, 242 spaces are required, but we have shown 288. So we are providing more parking than is required to accommodate any visitors that come or, for retail, commercial.
How much commercial space, non-residential space in this, did you say?
It's 2,000 square feet.
Only 2,000 square feet in the whole project?
If you look at the architectural drawings, you've got, each of the two buildings has 4 retail slots, 3 at around 2,000 square feet each, 1 at 1,000 square feet. So it's
More than 2,000.
it's several retail
14,000.
units, each of which are
Each of which.
2,000 or less, roughly.
Because, I'd like to see some degree of balance.
Oh, I'm sorry, we have 14,000 square.
14,000 for
14,000.
94 spaces, that's what the plan says.
Yeah, it's
And that would be in how many units?
14,000.
right. An individual retail unit is around 2,000, or
Yes.
one of them is just a little over 1,000.
Yes. So
yeah,
each retail space is 2,000 square feet approximately. 14,000 square feet, roughly, 94 spaces.
So, something like 7.
One space per.
No, but seven,
Seven, yeah,
there might be 7 different stores in that.
yes.
I think of 8, 2 buildings of 4 each.
Yeah.
Yeah, one is about
whatever.
1,100. So
Yeah, one's
if that's,
small, but-
yeah, one's a lot smaller. The other
You've
3
got
are
room for
up to
a
8.
number of businesses
Yes.
there.
And they're located in which, where on that?
And they're located off
those
of
are
the Westboro roadside.
The two closest to Westboro Road.
And does the parking work? Well, okay, yeah.
How does the traffic study work for this?
The traffic study's in progress. We've obtained Greenman Peterson that did the traffic study for the other portion of the project for the subdivision. And we wanted to find out if there were any concerns as far as the layout. I know they've been in touch with, they had asked if they could be in touch with the town to look at any new developments. I don't know if they've reached out to you.
They did.
And we're just awaiting the official traffic study from them, and we'll provide that as soon as we receive it. Like I said, we know this will be a lengthy process, so we wanted to get at least the initial hearing underway and familiarize you with the project.
Do we anticipate school like impact in terms of school-going kids?
I'm not sure that the board has the purview to look at the impacts of schools, and that kind of impact. We're not allowed to assess impact fees or anything like that, so.
No, but
No, no,
we always want to know what it's going to affect, particularly right now.
What's the assumption at least, right? In the best, at least what's the assumption? How many kids are here assuming?
Yeah,
So-
with 1 and 2 bedroom units, you're not gonna see a lot of kids. And just as an aside on that topic, adding 1 child to the school system doesn't change the cost of the school system at all.
No, I'm just talking
You can
about-
put another student in the classroom with no incremental cost. You add enough students, you start incurring some costs, but the incremental cost per student is really low. It's a whole lot lower than our per pupil expenditure would lead you to think.
There are different opinions on that.
Yeah, because we have 20%.
Different opinions.
And then there's math.
Well, I take the number of residential units in the town and divide it by the number of students and get an average and so on and so on,
Yeah, but you have to distinguish between the marginal cost or the incremental cost of adding a small number of students to the whole thing. And we don't need to get into that math right now. We don't need to argue about that right now.
But it is an issue that is of concern,
There
particularly this spring.
there is some process for analysis on that, but
Yeah.
it just, again, it leads into some tricky situations where the board would have to be careful of how they phrase those arguments.
Yeah, and when the public hearing opens, I'm sure this might come up. Just a quick curiosity question for now.
Yes, that question typically does come up when you're considering a development of any size.
I do have one thought that I don't know if Afonso as a developer has broached in terms of thought process, but in the neighboring property that we just did an extension for, is there is there any current thoughts at all about providing a either vehicular access or even a walking trail access from those, from that development to this property directly, rather than going through Institute Road?
Yes, there is a walking trail that was added at the request of the town planner when we were working directly with the town planner and the administrator. It's on the south side of the property, right in between the two. There's a 8-foot wide paved walking path and access easement, and it connects from the end of, I think it's Audrina. And
Yeah, if you scroll that picture up just
Oh,
a
I
little
see it
bit,
now,
yeah.
yes.
Right, from the bulb of the dead end up there, just going up.
so right at
You can see.
yeah, right at the
there's a
south
little walking
portion.
path there.
along the residential units on the backside.
The curve.
Yep, in
Of the park,
between,
yeah.
there is an 8-foot wide, paved walking path.
And where does that path eventually go to?
There's been discussion about extending it. I believe there's a piece of property that's also incorporated in the town right now. There's no further plans than what we're showing at this point, for this project, but I know the town had some thoughts about extending that to incorporate some of the other properties in the surrounding area.
There was a lot of push, some from people who have moved on, to tie into access across to the school, which is not far to the west. We went through quite a lot of energy on that for the subdivision, and it should be integrated. Give or take any wetlands over there.
Yeah, there's a good amount, which is why it didn't extend beyond the detention pond.
Could you describe the pocket park that you're proposing?
Right now, the pocket park is just an area of green space, and we're open for discussion with the town on what they would like to see in that area.
Just to be clear, on the northeast, where it says that particular section, that's not part of this parcel, right?
That's right.
That's
The one
something else.
Right, that's,
122 Westboro Road.
Yep, that's
yeah,
owned by.
those two buildings on either side, there are DMH, Department of Mental Health.
Oh, okay.
The state runs though, they've been there, they've been there as long as I can remember.
Non-functional though, right? Other function.
And always fairly obscure what they are. They're just there.
They're there.
Have you contacted those facilities yet about your proposed plans?
We have not, just the abutter notifications that have gone out.
It might be worthwhile to reach out to them directly to see if they have any concerns and to take into account whatever comments they may have in terms of screening or buffering or mitigation of impacts.
Sure.
Any other comments or questions from the board at this stage? We've got a ways to go through this process, and we've got some
I think we've hit on a
issues
good
that
many
we're gonna deal with.
questions.
Yeah.
Yeah, my only remaining kind of comment, but I don't feel a need to understand it right now, is the drainage plans, the post and pre. They're, at least from my eyes on my computer screen, they are way too cluttered for me to make heads or tails of them.
Okay.
I don't know if that's typical with drainage plans, but
Hopefully, our
Are you looking at the grading and drainage plan, or are you looking at the pre and post for the stormwater report?
pre and post for the stormwater report.
Okay. And that's one thing that we're talking about expanding, for visual discussions with the board, and go over phasing and what we're proposing to do, but that's something that needs to be vetted through Conservation Commission first.
Yeah, and I would tend to lean more toward conservation's opinion anyway on that point,
Yeah.
on that particular plan, but just wanted to call out that looking at it, I can't make heads or tails.
Yeah, it's very, there's a lot going on. There is a lot going on.
Is anybody from the public here to ask questions or make comments on this at this point?
Just Just here for the info.
Yeah, obviously, we're expecting this to be continued. So there will be ample opportunity to take a closer look at things and ask questions, and make comments. But if there's nothing else that we need to discuss tonight, then the next question would be, when should this board next review this? Is there anything that we would want to do by way of public hearing before the applicant has finished their work with conservation? Because if not, then there are some questions that we are gonna have, some procedural questions that we're gonna have to give some thought and study to, but that, like the trivial detail of how do we evaluate roadways? What standards do we use for roadways?
I think the conservative thing,
But we
committee
can research
decision is the
those.
first.
Yeah.
If the conservative committee
Yeah,
decision is.
and we don't know
completed,
when
then
that'll
it's better
be.
to Wait for that.
They,
We're meeting again with them on the 10th.
yeah, but when you'll have what you need, though, we don't want to delay any extra, but we don't want you to have to come back times when, if you set your request for the next meeting too close,
Right.
so,
Do we know when we would be hearing back from Graves?
So I do believe, I did speak with Graves, and I do expect that their peer review will be coming in shortly. Since we already have a meeting on the 9th, and that report will be coming in, I think having this on the agenda for the 9th would be good, just to have that discussion of anything that kind of comes up in that review, and we can kind of move forward.
Yeah,
and the date of
depending
the conservation is,
The 10th,
Yeah,
I believe. Is it the 10th?
could be Tuesday. Because it'd be great to know, if you knew what was gonna happen there, we could,
I know, and I think until we receive comments at this point, one, because it's the first time this type of project has been reviewed through planning board, and also that it's there is some overlap between the two projects, that the stormwater is going to need to be looked at thoroughly with Graves to make sure that, we've designed it appropriately and meeting town standards to accommodate both developments. That there's gonna be some overlap, some back and forth, initially to get the plans, up to where I think we could have a better discussion. If we meet before the Conservation Commission hearing, I don't know what we're gonna be able to go over without having a chance to review them and address them, and giving us about probably less than a week and a half to get plans addressed, even if we got something by the end of this week. I would almost suggest maybe extending
Okay.
to the
my
following
my,
one.
my thought, just to say out loud, was kind of along the same lines of what you were just saying, is that conservation's feedback would certainly be to help form a discussion with us. We may want to talk about whatever Graves does come up with as their comments, but our next meeting after the 9th of March is the 23rd of March to
Yeah, that would probably be more comfortable. Yeah, typically, we rely on Graves for the stormwater.
Yes.
We have stormwater requirements, but we've basically said, our position is that, you're satisfying the town of Grafton stormwater requirements, and that satisfies us. So, we don't need to, any sort of independent review of that. And it's really, whenever you think your plans will progress to a point where you've got things pretty well nailed down with conservation and you're ready to come back to us, I don't know that we need to see it before conservation is pretty well done.
Yeah, they don't meet until March 10th.
Yeah, and my one just additional piece of commentary is it's pretty common for other projects that and applicants that before us that if the applicant does not feel you do not feel that you're ready for a substantive discussion as of the 23rd, if conservation comes up with you need to make changes that you're still working on, an email ahead of time to the planner can usually just be the documentation we need to have a written request for a continuance that you may not even need to come in for.
And that being said, I mean, we're perfectly comfortable if you want to do the 9th, and we can let you know beforehand, or we can go for the 23rd. What we typically like to do from a company standpoint is provide any new information to Conservation Commission or the Planning Board at the same time. So everybody's looking at the same thing, everybody's looking at the same revisions, requirements, whether or not they're up for discussion at the next hearing. That's something that we can talk about as we continue to progress. But we do like to submit everything simultaneously, so the dates coincide, and they're very clear as far as what's been revised for Conservation Commission and what's been revised for Planning Board.
I assume that Graves is doing conservation review as well as ours.
Yes.
And I will say, to that about submitting the documentation is, as the planning department gets, the paperwork for this, application, it goes on our website, so any one of us or the public could look at any of the documents, and that does not require you to be coming back in and of itself for us to review the documents.
Okay.
So I guess I would say it's really the applicant and the board's discretion how they want to do it. You can always continue again if there's nothing substantial. So
Yeah,
Twen-
our,
23rd.
but if the 23rd is amenable to
our
both.
practice has generally been to give the applicant as much time as they feel they need to get whatever, to complete whatever is going to be done outside of our hearing process. We don't need you coming back every 2 weeks just to say, well, we're not ready yet. We'd rather not make you come in until you're prepared to move the
I think
discussion
everyone
with us forward.
understands all of that, and I think we're pretty well focused on a date.
Yeah.
And why don't we do it? Because I'd like to go home tonight,
March 20th
before midnight.
is fine. I think that gives us substantial time to address any comments.
Okay, so paperwork is being prepared for.
Move that we grant the applicant's written request to continue the hearing until March 23rd at 7:30.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion of the motion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Because motion carried unanimously.
Thank
We'll
you.
look forward to seeing the next round of paperwork on the 23rd or possibly later. Actually, we wouldn't mind seeing the paperwork earlier,
Yes.
but we'll discuss it at our public hearing on the 23rd.
Pending receipt of the comments, we should be able to get everything back in time, so you have plenty of time to review.
And as I said, if it turns out there are some, that you're not likely to be ready for anything substantive on the 23rd, just send an email requesting a continuation to
Excellent.
whatever date seems appropriate at the time.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Go from there. Thank
Appreciate
you.
it.
So, we are near the end of the agenda, and given that the clock says it's a little bit after 9, I don't want to go too deeply into anything else. I don't have a lot of additional information on the mill redevelopment overlay topic. I don't know if anybody has any updates to that.
I guess I would like to suggest that you ask CMRPC to work on that project with their the LPA time that you have accumulated. No one has actually made the request yet to them, because I don't think the board has decided how it wants to use the LPA time, but I think that would be a fairly good use.
Well, I think maybe, Chris, you know the folks over at CMRPC?
Yes, I know them very well.
I think that, my sense is that what Joe did was that he'd have some conversations with, the appropriate people up there and see if you can shape something.
Yep.
And I'll argue that it's 24 hours, not 23 hours. It's
Keep going to those meetings, Bob, and keep going to those meetings.
you know how many meetings? This is the short time job. That's the.
Okay, so that's all we have on that, but yeah, let's move that piece
Get right to
forward.
it. Yep.
On the topic of subdivision rules and regs update, I didn't really have a chance. I thought I'd have a little bit more material prepared for tonight. Bill did share with us a write-up on dead-end streets. And I don't know if my email made it out, but I had run across a neighborhood road design report that I found on the CPTC website, which I thought was interesting and something worth us considering. You know, we mentioned this evening the question of whether the subdivision rules should allow us to extend a definitive approval for more than a year. I just made a note on my list of things to think about, but I don't really have anything else at that point. I have been spending time over the last few days looking at some of the other plans that the town has done over the years that may have an impact on subdivision rules. The one in particular I spent a fair number of hours on is the old comprehensive master plan, which has a lot of stuff in it. It's more zoning than subdivision rules, but I'm trying to sort that out and at least come up with what I think may be relevant for us. But I haven't completed that project yet, but you know, it goes back to we discussed a little bit last time about updating the master plan, and yeah, there are certainly areas that need to be updated, but a fair amount of what the master plan did was at least potentially still worthy of our further consideration.
There's a rather large table at the back of things to do and people to do them. And we certainly should be reacquainted with all those things we're supposed to be doing.
Yes,
That
that in particular is one of the things I've been
although
working on.
there may also be a mission to remind everyone else.
Yeah, that thought has crossed my mind. So we'll follow up more on that as we continue going forward. It's a topic that's going to require some amount of thought and work on our part, and it's not always easy to find the time.
Yep. My only 2 comments on this so far. I didn't read every last word in this document that Bill sent us, which I was very happy of reading it. You know, what I have read and skimmed for the other parts, and I think it maintains a lot of great information that's going to help us. So definitely wanted to thank you. I had the chance for putting this together for us.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Bill.
And
Sure.
I also did notice, which is probably in part due to the town's website being down for a good portion of the day, but I would like to have seen this on the website as well for, you know, anyone on our agenda page or something that people could look at if, you know, they want.
Yeah, there ought to be sections, pages for
Yeah, I think
these initiatives.
I think we are probably accumulating enough documents, and we'll continue to do so on this particular topic, that we may want to have add something on the webpage. Say here are the documents that we've been looking at relative to subdivision rules. We may have a similar collection of documents that we will want to look at for mill redevelopment, possibly for other zoning bylaw work as time goes on. But you know, we've accumulated enough of these subdivision rules documents that we ought to have a collection of those on the website.
I'm not sure whether we should start on the projects page. Maybe the projects page is the right place and link to a section, a page, or a set of pages for each of these initiatives.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking about.
Right. And that's not too hard to do. Easy for me to say.
Easy to say as long as someone else has to do the work, right?
Right. Well, I used to do it until
Yeah.
I was no longer allowed to,
Yeah. So, be that as anything else anybody wants to bring up on the question of subdivision rules for right now? The last item on the, well, almost the last item of substance, I suspect, would be a staff report. So what does staff have to report to us?
So we are kind of working on those initiatives. I'm also working, we have the open space and resource plan fairly wrapped up. I'm working on the final details of that. So I'm hoping CMRPC will be providing our final draft of that very, very shortly. So that'll be coming before the board, as well as several other boards before
It has to
endorsement.
come before the Open Space and Recreation Plan Committee for
Correct.
approval.
Correct.
And I'm the board's representative on that committee. I'm also the vice chair of the committee, and I think the committee doesn't have a chair since Scott Conway left, so I guess it's.
We'll work on that.
in your spare time, Dave.
It's one of the several hats I wear. It has to be, as soon as CMRPC gets something for us, we'll try to organize a meeting of the committee.
Correct.
And then it goes to planning board and other committees.
Correct. So that's, yeah, so that's the main, one of the main focuses
The other
right
thing we
now.
talked about today was the zoning amendments.
Correct. The,
So, the building inspector requested the planning board recommend a definition for contractor's yards. It's a permitted use in the use table, but he doesn't have a definition for it. So he would like to have a definition in the zoning bylaw to help guide his determination as to what constitutes a contractor's yard. And the second question that he would like the board to look at, whether you could do it for this annual or maybe in the fall, was to have some kind of parking relief for the town common area, which I believe is a neighborhood business district, and there are many small lot businesses there that don't have room for their own on-site parking. So through some kind of an overlay district or a waiver process to allow the board to grant reductions or other relief from parking requirements of zoning bylaw.
That was a hot topic a year ago or so when we were giving a permit to the tavern, which is located in the basement of One Grafton Common. And we talked about an effort to look at that, but there were about 50 other things, and I don't think it got really looked at. I think that we have to somehow recognize the historic situation. You've got this, and the fact that what we've got has been working for 100 years, whether or not it has anything to do with the current zoning bylaw parking rules, and find some way to harmonize that. And maybe you have some. I think that may be the only zone, the only place in town that's quite that bad. There might be one or two other historic locations where, they were built before everybody had to have big parking lots, and now there's a built infrastructure.
John Allen, who is the Economic Development Coordinator and sits in the planning office, has mentioned a couple of cases where he's had requests for space in that area, and because of parking, it's been very difficult for businesses to decide to locate there because they can't meet the parking requirements. So
Yeah.
it's coming at us from multiple directions.
Is there any existing vacant spaces there that would?
No.
Turnover, I think, is, when vacancies occur, other folks
Well,
look to occupy.
Is this there isn't enough parking around here for my business to succeed, or is this, I can't get a permit because I don't have parking?
Well, it's required for each use to have its own parking, and it's very difficult on small lots. So
Yeah, no,
the thought would be to whether you could count on-street spaces or other parking, public
Yeah,
parking lots
and
towards
that-
your own requirements.
Yeah, and testing against the current requirements only comes up when they come in for a special permit, or maybe a site plan. But I'm not sure what properties are having that problem, but we should
Yeah,
get a
we
better
could
idea of
get-
all
right, yeah,
that.
Chris
But
could
we have
provide,
we have a historic committee going back to around the time that I did the master plan, the common study committee, subcommittee, which I created when I was chair at one point. I'm the only surviving member of it. But every year we put me back in, so that we still have it, still remember it. And, we could start under that umbrella if necessary to try to find some sort of a district, because most of the, I don't know how well defined we are on what parking spaces there are, but like all the parking spaces along the north side in front of One Grafton Common and the church and the country store and so on, those are public. Those those don't belong to those businesses. The church has some parking. McGill, I guess it's still McGill, has some parking. The inn has some parking. But otherwise, it's around the public spaces around both inside and outside on the road around the common. And we need to, If only we were doing the master plan by pieces, you know, we
Yeah,
could have an element here that we could be working on.
I think staff can look at a number of those issues, and maybe more comprehensively, and then we can draft up some proposals that maybe the board could chew on.
Why don't we at least put that on the list that we're
Yeah,
trying to
let's-
work
yeah.
on?
Right, there's, you know, there's
The new
clearly some
library
further
will
conversation
also
is needed
impact
here,
Huge.
but, yeah, that's.
What did she say?
She
The
said the
new
library
library
project would impact.
Will be a huge impact, but right now it's a huge negative impact.
Yeah. Anything else from staff? Anything
Nope,
other?
that's it.
Also, what happens across from the library at the DPW?
Yeah, the DPW with the,
Yes,
a gateway, if you will.
yes, we will be following up on the topic of, you know, proceeding with further work on the, I forget what we call it, the project to, you know, think about what to do with the old DPW site.
Gateway.
We have a conference call scheduled for, I think it's next week, with the, whoever's leading up that, so that, you know, we're starting to follow up on that beyond the sessions we had with the public a few weeks back.
Which we is that? Let's have him go.
I've been asked to participate as the chairman of the planning board.
So,
You will probably be
so I'll
involved.
be there along with the town manager's office, pulled together a number of department heads that are relevant stakeholders, as well as other
Yeah.
chairmen or members of boards. The invite was sent out to kind of relevant parties to have a comprehensive discussion on it.
Yeah, so that will, certainly, the results of that will be reported back at the next planning board meeting.
Yep.
And we'll see how everything follows up with that. Are there any reports from planning board representatives on town committees and CMRPC, on anything we haven't already covered?
The only thing that I want to mention is I have a CPC meeting this Thursday, and at the meeting on the agenda is a potential proposal for the super park for this coming Springtown meeting. I don't have any more details about exactly what's going to be in this proposal, or if it's going to get dropped by the time the meeting comes. We had one discussion of it in the fall, and then when it came to the deadline to actually have CPC support it or not, it was pulled and not brought forward. So I don't know exactly what's going to be discussed yet, but that is this Thursday's meeting.
Yes, if CPC decides to go forward with some funding towards Super Park, that has to be approved by town meeting
Yes, it does.
by a majority vote.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah, CPC is a majority vote.
Yeah. I really think that should be left alone until after the override.
I did suggest exactly that at the previous CPC
We're not the
meeting.
only, we're not the only ones.
Yeah, I did suggest exactly the previous CPC that I thought the
What?
timing would be much better for fall rather than spring.
Okay.
But it's not ultimately my decision by myself to determine when it gets brought forward or what the overall board votes.
Well, I think that it would hurt both Super Park and the override
Yeah, I agree.
to bring it forward. I think it's already doing a certain amount of harm.
Any other reports from planning board representatives on town committees and CMRPC? If not,
Vote to adjourn.
Second.
moved and seconded that this meeting be adjourned. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?